it's been a while. It's been a long time. I call those years the 12 years, the years of silence, or, sometimes I say 12 years a slave, which isn't meant to be offensive. It's just I really was at the mercy of this eating disorder. But I can't even talk that much about those years because I didn't know what was happening. I didn't understand what was going on. A lot of people get confused. They're like, how could you not know? And the eating disorders are really tricky. They're really manipulative. It's not like you get a screening for an eating disorder or there's an actual physical monster like hanging on your back. That's your eating disorder. I just didn't understand what was happening. What I did know was that I felt alone, I felt ashamed, and I felt very afraid. I guess the 3 A's. I felt alone because I didn't know a single other person who went through this or anything similar to this, because nobody talks about it. It's so stigmatized, and the only thing I really knew about eating disorders was from an 8th grade health class video, and I knew that DJ Tanner had an eating disorder for half a day, and then she was all good, with the reflective, heartfelt background music and talking to her dad, and so that's pretty much what I knew, and so because it wasn't discussed so much, I felt ashamed because I felt different. I felt like there was something wrong with me. So I was very ashamed. I didn't want anybody to know anything about, like even possibly, potentially some sort of disorder. And that's what made me really afraid, is that I didn't want people to judge me. I didn't want people to think differently of me. What would they think? They'd probably think that eating disorders are just, and that, I'm just vain and selfish and just care about how I look and all that stuff. And so I was really afraid. And there are things that I've discovered since then, in these few years, that I finally acknowledged the eating disorder. And I say acknowledge, I don't like saying admit, because that kind of implies that I'm doing something wrong. And I didn't ask for this. I didn't, this isn't something that I brought on to myself. I didn't hurt anybody. So, it took a while for me to acknowledge it. And when I did, I can now see that it really was my coping mechanism to get through some really traumatic experiences. And it got a lot stronger with each of life's difficulties, because growing up, we go to school, we're taught math and science and all this stuff, but we're not taught how to deal with our insecurities, rejections, disappointments, fears, any of our negative, feelings. We just know that they're bad and that we don't want them anywhere near us. And so I was trying to run away, and I was trying to outrun, and that's when I started relying on the eating disorder, whether it was, my aunt passed from cancer, and then my mom was diagnosed with cancer about a year later. I was a victim of assault in college. I was in a horrible train accident. I had a DUI. And so every single time something like that happened, that's what I knew to do, was to rely more on the eating disorder. And that gave it a lot of strength. It became really, really powerful. And it really dictated pretty much how I lived my life. Now I can see that for so long, all the decisions that I were making were based on how to navigate the eating disorder, how to hide the eating disorder. And because I had no sense of self-worth, I didn't know who I was, because I was just living the eating disorder. And I was so hell-bent on people-pleasing, because that was the only sense of validation I could get, was the approval of others, because I didn't know anything about myself. And so to feel good, or to supposedly feel good, I just tried to people please. I tried to do anything that I could to bring something to the table, because I felt like if I didn't do everything that would gain the approval of others, then they would leave, because I have nothing to offer. I really felt like, I was disposable, and that because I was so damaged, and there was just so much wrong with me. I'm trying not to get emotional. And so it took a long time. It took a long time for when I finally acknowledged to my family the eating disorder. It almost wasn't my choice. It just got to the point where it was, I wasn't hiding. You know, I wasn't doing that good of a job, because after a while, people know. You think you're really smooth and that nobody knows, but you know, people were aware. And so when I told my parents, I said I would get, you know, try and get help. I didn't know anybody else who went through this. I didn't know where to start. And this is where MEDA actually will always have a special place in my heart, because it took me a while to even just put into Google, like, eating disorder help, because that would make it real. I didn't want to type it out. I didn't want to put it out into the internet abyss, because I felt like that would make it a real thing. Like, it's not just like speculation, like I'm actually saying it, I'm actually writing it down. And it was really difficult to figure out where to start with getting help, like what help even looked like. I didn't really understand. And that's what really frustrates me now, is it's so hard to get to the point where you accept that you need help, and that, you know, that's how you'll get through this, and you won't be able to do it alone. And then it's just that much harder to finally figure out where you're supposed to go. And so through MEDA's directory, I was able to find a nutritionist. It took several months to finally see her. I was really dragging my feet. I just was scared. I would put off, I would cancel appointments. And so it took several months to see her, and then several months later, I finally went to an intake appointment at a treatment center. And so I was expecting to go in, you know, have a little chat, and then go back to work and you know, say that I would be leaving early from work a couple days a week, and, you know, it would be, you know, just get some papers signed from my manager, and it would be all good. But I went, and they recommended residential treatment, and I was not expecting that, and I was not into that idea at all. I really thought, you know, Tuesdays, Thursdays, you know, I'll see you there. And they were like, you have to leave your job, and I was like, no, I don't. And I'm not normally speechless, but I was speechless. I was just blindsided. And so I fought it, and we ended up compromising on partial. So I started partial, and the way I am is anything that I decide I want to do, I'm able to figure out how to do it, and I usually do it on my own. I used to always think people saying, like, oh, you need other people. I was like, that's really dramatic. Like, I don't really need anybody. I can figure out how to do it on my own, do it well, do it quickly. I went to partial. I started on a Thursday. By that weekend, I was pissed. I was like, why do I still have an eating disorder? I was like, that weekend, I was like, why do I still have urges? Like, why am I so, like, hello? Like, it's been so many years. Okay, I get it. I have an eating disorder, all right? Like, fine. I went to a center, sat there for a couple days. Like, why am I still struggling? And now, you know, that's not how any of this works. and I understand that now. But so I did partial for a couple months, and then it was last spring, I graduated and did the rock ceremony. And unfortunately, because life is fucking hilarious, I had another really traumatic experience with a good friend of mine. And at the time, it was the only friend who knew. So I was very, very emotionally attached, and I had a lot invested in this friendship, and something not ideal happened. And it just so happened that it was the weekend right before my rock ceremony. And so apparently a couple months of partial isn't enough to hold you steady after 12 years of an eating disorder. So things went downhill. I relapsed pretty badly, and then I went back for another intake, and they again recommended residential, but there weren't any beds. So they recommended partial, and I was like, no, if I'm gonna leave work again, I'm not gonna, you know, I finally was somewhat on board with going to fully get help. But then work, you know, what am I gonna do with work? I have to go to work, my team needs me, you know, and so then I found out that somebody had mentioned, because I was leaving a couple days to go to groups, and one of the senior people was like, oh, Kim's like not at her desk sometimes, And when I heard that, I was like, oh, now I definitely can't go to residential, because this is really important. This is my career, this is my job. And so one night, I was working on a project for work, of course, one evening at home, and I was typing the presentation that I was supposed to give the next day. And all of a sudden, I couldn't move the right side of my body. I was typing, but then the right side got heavy, and then I noticed that I wasn't able to lift the right hand, and so that's alarming. And so I put my hand down, I was also on the phone with somebody, and so I put my hand down, and then I realized I couldn't move, my right leg, like at pretty much any part of my right side. And so I got off the phone and I panicked and I called my mom over, and I was like, Mom, like I can't move with my right side. And so she's, trying to rub my arm and praying, and so it's still kind of happening, but it's like I didn't really understand what's happening. And so I've had anxiety attacks before, but it's usually on my left arm where it starts feeling numb. And so I was like, it's probably just something like that. So I called my cousin, who is an ER doctor. He gets a lot of phone calls from us. And I called him, and I just wanted confirmation that it was just anxiety, that it was nothing more serious. And so he told me that it did not sound like anxiety, and it sounded like a stroke, and that I had to go to the emergency room immediately. And so I listened to him, and I went. And because of the train accident from before, it was a neurological episode, they called it. But what was really alarming about that ER trip was my vitals. The doctors, were in disbelief, and that was when I knew it was bad. I knew I was really sick and in a bad place, but it was kind of just seeing, this medical staff just like in disbelief that I was alive was really, it really shook me. And so that was what really pushed me to finally go to residential treatment. And so I'm the type of person that, if I go away to a new, on vacation or something, I do my due diligence. I research. I know what the people, what their accents are. I know what the weather will be like. I know, the history and the top, sightseeing spots are. And so, of course, this is the scariest decision of my entire life. I'm gonna give up my freedom, go live with people I don't know. And, if you've watched any documentaries, it's kind of scary going into it. So you don't exactly know what to expect. And so I went and tried to do some research. And I couldn't find anything. And that was really mind-blowing to me, because there's so much on the internet. I was so frustrated. I was like, I can find pretty much 1,000 reviews on any movie ever, and I can't find somebody's thought about, a day and like what to expect, what's gonna happen in there. And so I figured I'd start my own blog, and that's what I did. And I was still very much ashamed. I didn't want my name, Kim, associated with an eating disorder, so I used a fake name. And I was like, I might as well document it, but really it'll probably be like my previous blog attempts and just, last a few weeks. And so I went to residential, and one of I would say the foundation of my recovery, and this started back in partial, was feeling less alone. Treatment was, even though partial didn't solve me right away, it was the first time that I could be completely honest and tell these people things that I've never told my closest friends and family, things that I was keeping in for years and years and years. And not only were people receptive and understanding and non-judgmental, but they were nodding and understanding. People understood. And so residential was just more of that, forming those bonds. And it's just, I really do liken it to my dad fought in the Vietnam War, and his bond with his fellow army men. It's almost like you're in the trenches and you're fighting, and you're bonded by something that's bigger than all of you. But if you stick together and form those bonds, it really helped me in my recovery. And so, and the blog thing, for some reason, I guess there's a demand for people to talk more about eating disorders, because some, people found it from all over the world and started sending me messages of love and encouragement. And I finally felt like myself again. Like, I always used to think it was so corny when people be like, oh, like, I need to go find myself. Like, I was like, you're right there. Like, go find yourself. Like, don't be so existentialist. Like, and so I remember, it was like that, almost like tangible, where I was walking back into the group room, and I was like, whoa. Like, I was just me. I was completely honest, and I was me. It was almost like an old friend coming back, because I spent so many years hiding and pretending and just putting on this version of myself that I wanted people to see, because that was the one that would get the most approval, I thought. And so it was life-changing going to residential. And so it was time to go back to work, and I was extremely, extremely anxious about going back to work. I even shared in a group one day, I said, I know what's gonna happen. I have to buy new suits, and I'm gonna go back to work, and people are gonna see me, and they're gonna know exactly where I've been and what I've been going through, and they're gonna judge me, they're gonna think all those horrible things about me, and so I'm really scared about going back to work. And the version of me now wants to say, like, what? Like, that, first of all, no, and who gives a F, you know, like, who cares? But at the time, that anxiety was very real, and I was terrified. I didn't want anybody to know, and so I had a little spiel prepared. I was just gonna go back, and you know, when you're gone for a couple months, people have some questions, and so I was just gonna say, I had to deal with a personal matter, but everything's better now, thanks for asking, and just keep it really vague, and I'm sure that would stop all the rumors. But I just got really tired of being ashamed, because I thought about how other people, you know, people who have diabetes or any other ailment or any struggle, they don't have to hide. They don't have to act like they're doing something so horrible and that they're morally, you know, flawed and just bad people. And so I was like, this is something I didn't ask for. This is something I'm going through. This is me. So, you know, deal with it, like it or leave it. Like, so instead, I went back and I would say, hey, you know, it has been a while. I was in treatment for an eating disorder, but things are better now. Thank you for asking. And let me tell you, that actually really shut them up, because then it just stopped the speculation and the rumors and whatever. People love to talk. And so that began my kind of coming out, where I shared the blog, and since then I've become, you know, I started hosting a support group at my apartment. I did a TEDx talk recently about eating disorders, and writing an ebook and an actual book, and so my advocacy has really been another foundation of my recovery, and it's really taken off. But at the time, I got again last fall. I was, you know, the blog was really taking off, and I had the idea for the book, and I was speaking, and it was so cool, and look, I'm helping people, and everything's great. But what I didn't realize was that I was drinking in a really awkward amount. It was a lot, and it was hidden. I was being very secretive, and I honestly was blindsided again. And it's really hard to explain to people who don't understand that. They're like, how can you not know that was happening? Because you're doing the behavior, like you're going to the store and you're doing all this stuff, but I was telling myself, I was justifying it, that writers drink, it's like a thing. So like, it's totally cool, and look, I'm helping people, so I must be fine. And so finally, my friend, it was the end of November, it was about a year ago, told me that she can't watch me drown anymore. And I had no idea what she was talking about. I thought she meant that, you know, I had been back to work, and now I was working on all this advocacy, blogging stuff. And I assured her, I said, no, don't worry about it. I do this in the evening, and you know, it's not too much. And she's like, no, the drinking. And so they had somewhat of an intervention, and I was really, really blindsided. And I was like, oh my God, you're right. Like, it really took over, and it was the eating disorder calling in the reinforcements, because, you know, co-occurring, the rate of people developing, you know, some sort of substance abuse issue is very, very high. And so December 1st, had an intervention. there are no places around here that help with co-occurring disorders, and that's especially with the how prevalent it is. It's very unfortunate, and it actually puts you in a really shitty situation because if you go back to, say if I were to go back to the eating disorder center, they would say, oh no, but you have alcohol use disorder now, and we don't know how to deal with that, so you can't come back. And then if you go to a detox, they say, oh, but you have an eating disorder, so we don't know how to deal with that. So basically, the more issues you have, the less options you have. And the closest place I could find was in Illinois. And because of insurance, it was a whole long month of just, I can't even get into insurance. But it was my friends were great. They tried to, keep an eye on me between, the eating disorder and the alcohol, and it was really scary this time last year to somehow be unsafe with myself. I couldn't trust myself to just be alone, and I went from being really annoyed that people were following me around every second to being really grateful that people loved me enough to not want to see me, I was in a bad place. And eventually it was bad. So to hold off on to getting to the treatment center, fortunately my company changed insurance, so I was able to go at the beginning of the year, but I ended up going to the ER first and then going to a psychiatric unit for a couple days to keep myself safe. And I went to Illinois. I checked in January 5th for co-occurring for eating disorders and for alcohol use disorder. I'm happy to say that minus one lapse in April, I've been sober ever since January 5th. And it's been really life-changing. It's basically my entire adult life was eating disorder and drinking. That's what people do, like food and drink. That's any socializing, especially my age, like drinks after work. Like I realized after going to treatment that, a tough day at work, my body almost just would start walking to either, find food or drink, just something that to latch onto because I couldn't deal with it on my own. And so since then, it's been really life-changing. And in terms of relationships, I will say that some people have walked away. I think it can be a little heavy. Like, we liked the Kim that was, into going out and fun and all that stuff, and now we're talking about mental illness. That's, that's kind of, I don't know if, I think it's partially because it's so stigmatized that people are so uncomfortable and, people fear what they don't understand, or maybe in some cases I think it's a bit threatening because I think people don't want to look at themselves and they're like, oh, well, I do that too. Does that mean I have a problem? But I'm not ready to go there. And so everyone, is on their own journey. This has been my journey, and so much has changed. Honestly, sometimes I feel like I was born last year. Like at 30 years old, I was finally born, and now I'm like, oh, I actually don't like that. I was just, going along with what everybody else liked, or, I feel like I'm really learning more about myself every single day. And the best part is to go back to those 3 A's. I no longer feel alone. None of us who are struggling is alone. 70 million people all over the world struggle with eating disorders, and that was so important to me, is to not, because feeling, I can't believe it, like looking back, the avoidance is so powerful, because how could I possibly think that I was the only person in the world who had an eating disorder? But I really didn't think that this affected anyone else, and that I was just, something was wrong, and I didn't want to think about it. I'm no longer ashamed. I'm very vocal about recovery and about eating disorders and about the stigma and about misconceptions, and very vocal about it. And that's something I never thought would ever happen. I went from being so terrified, vehemently denying any sort of confrontation at all from my family, to getting up on, to being here. Never thought I would do this. Never thought I would get up on a stage and talk about this. And so there's just no reason to be ashamed. And I'm no longer afraid of what people might think, because I've learned that people are going to think things and say things no matter what. And what's really important is that I know what path I'm on and I know what I need to do. And because, I had this epiphany in treatment one day. I was like, you know what, people could say, we were sharing about triggering things that our families have said, or our coworkers or friends, and I realized, I said, people can say anything they want. Like right now, I could go run outside and say that I'm actually going to be the next president of the United States. Like, clearly Donald Trump, he can say anything he wants. People, it's a thing. Like, I can say I have $3 billion, but I don't. And, so even though you can say anything, it doesn't have to mean anything. So people can say what they want to say, and I've really developed, thicker skin, because if you're going to be judgmental, if you're going to, look down on me or say certain things about me, then that's your problem. And so I'm not afraid anymore. I'm not afraid of, it's funny because it's trickled to other facets of my life, the being fearlessly. I used to be really intimidated by senior management or things like that. And I'm like, you know what, if I'm sticking up to my eating disorder, which is like so much scarier than you, if you're gonna say something stupid, I'm gonna call you out on it. If you're gonna treat, somebody on my team unfairly, like I'm gonna say something. I'm gonna advocate for myself. I'm gonna advocate for others. And that started with the eating disorder. But that's really, flowed into all the other parts of my life. And so the acceptance, going back to earlier when I said I was, after 2 days, I was like, what the, WTF, why do I still have this? One of the things that actually really helps me in my process is accepting that I have an eating disorder. I can say it now, or, I struggled with an eating disorder. And that's okay. It happens, and that's a part of my life. These are the cards that I've been dealt, and I just have to do the best I can to work through it. And I accept that it's not, it's not an overnight process. I used to get really annoyed at treatment. They're like, oh, recovery is like up and down and this way. And I remember being like, you know how annoying that is? Like, I want to get from point A to point B. Like, put me on Google Maps. Like, why are we like taking all these? And so the more you fight that, the harder it is to actually recover, and the more you accept that, like you're like, all right, fine, this is where I am, and what do I have to do? And the last A word is, I would say, is awesome, because everyone I've met is so amazing, so awesome. I have a whole new perception of what it means to be a hero. I don't agree that heroes are the actors or musicians or athletes. It's the people who fight every single day for recovery that I meet in AA meetings, that I meet in support group meetings. These are the people who are the heroes. These are the people who wake up every single day and find that strength and courage to fight, because it's hard. This is the hardest thing I've ever had to do. And it's been really humbling because, like I said, I thought I could, anything I put my mind to. But everyone is just so amazing, and I finally, can start to somewhat like myself and think that of myself too. I didn't like myself for a very long time. I didn't even know that I didn't. But finally seeing some good in myself has been really, that's also been life-changing and refreshing, and it just makes me really excited about life. It makes me really excited about what opportunities I had and what to look forward to. I remember one day in treatment, a girl said that she didn't know why she would want recovery, because she wasn't like anybody else who had kids to go back to, or a husband to go back to, or certain tangible, like school or program. Like, why? And I chimed in. I said, I don't have any of those things either, but I know that things will present themselves in recovery, because there's no way that we're going to find all these amazing things when we're at the grasp of this illness and at the mercy of the eating disorder. And so I'm happy to say that it has happened every day. I learn something new about myself, and new opportunities arise. And so I just, wish that all of us can get to the point where we really do believe that about ourselves, because we are awesome, we are amazing, and we can take the world. Thank you.